The night started like a dream come true. The ballroom of the Moravia Hotel in the heart of Madrid was impeccably decorated, with twinkling lights hanging from the ceiling like fallen stars and an orchestra playing softly in the background. My husband, Alejandro, and I were the perfect hosts for our celebration of 2 years of marriage. After some obstacles early in our relationship, I finally believed I had made peace with my mother-in-law, Carmen, a notoriously difficult woman. My best friend, Lucia, had helped me plan every detail of the party. From the beginning, I wanted everything to be perfect. The tables were decorated with white roses and delicate gold tones, waiters circulated serving glasses of Spanish cava and small portions of gourmet tapas. Carmen had arrived, something that, in itself, was a personal achievement, and was sitting in the back, in her usual pose as a silent queen. As the night progressed, the murmur of conversation and laughter filled the air. I could see our friends and family enjoying themselves, sharing stories and toasting our happiness. At one point, I saw my brother Pablo chatting animatedly with Carmen, which gave me a spark of hope. Maybe things really were looking up after all. Alejandro approached me, with a smile that illuminated the entire room. "Ready for the toast, darling?" he asked me, taking my hand. I nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. Together, we headed to the center of the room, where a small stage had been set up. My husband took the microphone and began an emotional toast. He talked about our first meeting in Retiro Park, how we fell in love walking through the cobblestone streets of Madrid, and the difficulties we overcame together. He highlighted our accomplishments, the love we built, and made sure everyone at the party knew how much he considered me the reason for his happiness. "Mary," he said, looking me directly in the eyes, "you are the sun of my mornings and the moon of my nights. These 2 years have been the best of my life, and I know that each day with you will be even better than the last." My heart filled with pride and joy with every word. I saw our friends smile, some even wiping discreet tears. However, at the end of her speech, I noticed a peculiar expression on Carmen's face. I tried to ignore their discreet glances, concentrating on the moment we were living. When Alejandro finished, it was my turn to take the microphone. With shaking hands, I began to thank everyone present. "Thank you for being here tonight, sharing this special moment with us," I said. "Each of you has been a part of our love story in some way, and we are grateful for your support and love." As I spoke, my eyes scanned the room, stopping briefly on each familiar face. I saw my parents, Antonio and Elena, smiling with pride. At my side, Alejandro gently squeezed my hand, giving me strength. Everything seemed perfect, like something out of a modern fairy tale set in the vibrant Spanish capital. I continued my speech, sharing anecdotes from our 2 years of marriage. I talked about our trip to Seville, where Alejandro tried to learn flamenco and ended up stumbling over his own guitar. I mentioned our first New Year's Eve as married, when we burned the lucky grapes and had to run out to buy more at midnight. Each story elicited laughter and murmurs of recognition among the guests. And of course, I added, I can't fail to mention our family. To my parents, who have always been an example of love and commitment. To my in-laws, especially Carmen, who has welcomed us into her life with warmth. I paused, searching for the right words. "Thank you for being part of this journey with us." As I spoke these last words, I once again noticed something strange in Carmen's expression. It was no longer just a discreet look. Now she seemed to be fighting with herself, as if she wanted to say something but was holding back. I tried not to care about it, convincing myself that it was just my imagination. I ended my speech with a toast, to love, to family, and to many more years of happiness together. The glasses were raised, the clink of glass filled the air, and for a moment, everything was perfect. After the toast, the party continued with renewed energy. The orchestra began to play livelier songs, and soon the dance floor was filled with couples moving to the rhythm of pasodobles and sevillanas. Alejandro took me by the hand and took me to the center of the floor, where we began to dance, lost in our own world. As we spun to the music, I caught a glimpse of Carmen talking quietly to Alejandro's uncle, Ramon. They seemed to be arguing about something, and Carmen's expression became increasingly tense. I tried not to worry, concentrating on the moment I was sharing with my husband. "Is something wrong?" Alejandro asked me, noticing my distraction. "No, nothing," I replied, forcing a smile. "I'm just happy to be here with you." We danced a few more songs before Lucia approached, interrupting us with a mischievous smile. "Allow me to steal a dance from your husband?" he asked me, winking at me. "Sure, but give it back to me in full," I joked, giving Alejandro a quick kiss before handing him over to my friend. I took advantage of that moment to go up to the bar and ask for some water. While I was waiting for my drink, I felt a presence next to me. It was Carmen. "Maria," he said, in a voice that was trying to be kind but failing to hide some tension. "What a nice party they have organized." "Thank you, Carmen," I responded, trying to maintain a cordial tone. "We're so glad you could come." There was a moment of awkward silence before Carmen spoke again. "You know, I've always wanted the best for my son," he began, and I could sense something more coming. "And I must admit that I had my doubts about you at first." I felt my body tense, preparing for whatever he was going to say next. But before I could continue, Alejandro appeared next to us, smiling and oblivious to the tension of the moment. "What are my two favorite women talking about?" he asked, wrapping an arm around my waist. Carmen forced a smile. "Nothing important, son. I was just telling Maria how nice the party is." Alejandro looked at us both, and for a moment I thought he had noticed something strange. But then he just smiled and said, "Well, how about the three of us take a photo together?" We nodded, and headed towards the photographer we had hired for the occasion. As we posed, with Alejandro in the middle, I couldn't help but think about how fragile this moment of apparent family harmony was. The night continued, and little by little the guests began to say goodbye. As we said goodbye to each one, thanking them for their presence and the gifts they had brought us, I couldn't stop thinking about the interrupted conversation with Carmen. What would you have wanted to tell me? Had his feelings towards me really changed, or was he just keeping up appearances for Alejandro's sake? When the last guest left, Alejandro and I were left alone in the living room, surrounded by withered flowers and empty glasses. We hugged each other in silence, exhausted but happy. "It's been a perfect night," Alejandro murmured in my ear. I nodded, wanting to believe it with all my heart. But a small part of me couldn't help but feel like something was coming, something that could test everything we had built. As we left the hotel, under the starry sky of Madrid, I promised myself that, no matter what happened, I would fight for our love and our family. I didn't know then how soon I would have to fulfill that promise. The anniversary party continued in full swing. The atmosphere at Hotel Moravia was warm and welcoming, full of laughter and lively conversations. Alejandro and I moved among the guests, thanking them for their presence and sharing anecdotes from our 2 years of marriage. Despite the tension I had felt earlier with Carmen, I tried my best to keep a sincere smile and enjoy every moment. Around midnight, Lucia approached me with a glass of cava in her hand. "Maria, how about you give a little thank you speech? I think everyone would love to hear you one more time." I hesitated for a moment. We had given a speech before, but the idea of closing the night with a few heartfelt words seemed appropriate. "You're right," I said to Lucia with a smile. "I'm going to do it." I headed towards the small stage that we had prepared for the occasion. Alejandro saw me and winked at me from the other side of the room, where he was chatting with some co-workers. I grabbed the microphone and took a deep breath, preparing to speak. "Dear friends and family," I began, feeling all eyes turn to me. "I want to thank you once again for being here tonight, celebrating with Alejandro and me these 2 wonderful years of marriage." As I spoke, I saw Carmen shift restlessly in her seat. He seemed to be murmuring something to his sister, who was sitting next to him. I tried not to pay attention to him and continued with my speech. "Each of you has been part of our love story in some way. From our parents, who have supported us from the beginning, to our friends, who have been there through the good times and the bad." Suddenly, a sudden movement in the back of the room caught my attention. Carmen had gotten up from her seat and was moving quickly toward the stage. Her face was tense, her eyes shining with a determination I had never seen in her before. "Carmen, what?" I started to say, but before I could finish the sentence, she was already at my side, snatching the microphone from my hands. The entire room seemed to freeze in an awkward silence. The guests looked on in confusion, some with surprised expressions, others with concern. Alejandro, who had been on the other side of the room, began to move quickly toward us, but Carmen's voice rang out before he could reach us. "This woman," she began, her eyes fixed on me, "is not who you think she is." His voice was strong, charged with an emotion I couldn't immediately identify. Was it anger, pain, or something else? I felt the color leave my face. The gazes of everyone present alternated between Carmen and me, some with expressions of shock, others with morbid curiosity. I tried to speak, to defend my honor, but the words refused to come out of my mouth. "Maria," Carmen continued, her voice shaking slightly, "has been deceiving us all, especially my son." He paused dramatically, and I could see Alejandro finally reach the edge of the stage, his face a mix of confusion and concern. "Mom, what are you doing?" Alejandro asked, his voice barely audible over the growing murmur of the guests. But Carmen didn't pay attention to him. Instead, she pulled something out of her bag, a small tablet. "I have proof," he declared, holding the device up as if it were evidence in a trial. "Proof that Maria is not the perfect daughter-in-law everyone thinks she is." The murmur in the room intensified. I could see my parents, Antonio and Elena, rising from their seats, their faces pale with worry. Lucia, my best friend, seemed to be about to go on stage to defend me. "Carmen," I finally managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper, "I don't know what you're talking about. Please, let's get down from here and talk in private." But she didn't listen to me. His eyes shone with a mixture of triumph and pain as he spoke again. "Do you remember the designer shoes my late husband gave me? Those shoes were a family heirloom, an inheritance I planned to pass on to Alejandro's wife when I deemed her worthy." My mind was spinning. What was he talking about? I knew about those shoes, of course. Carmen mentioned them at every family gathering, boasting about their value and sentimental meaning. But I had never touched them, much less. "She stole them," Carmen shouted, pointing directly at me. "He stole them from my closet and sold them. For money." The silence that followed this accusation was deafening. I could feel everyone's gazes on me, some with doubt, others with disbelief. Alejandro, who was now at my side, took my hand. "Mom, this is ridiculous," he said, his voice firm but with a hint of disbelief. "Maria would never do something like that. There must be a misunderstanding." But Carmen wasn't finished. With trembling fingers, he manipulated his tablet and then turned it toward the audience. "I have proof," he repeated. "Security cameras. I recorded her entering my room and leaving with the shoes." The video, although blurry and poor quality, showed someone who looked like me entering a room and leaving with something in his hands. My heart sank. I knew it wasn't me, but how could I prove it? "This is a mistake," I said, my voice louder now, driven by outrage and fear. "I would never do something like that. Carmen, please stop this." But she was beyond reason. With tears in his eyes, he shouted, "I'll call the police. Have them arrest you right here, in front of everyone." Chaos broke out in the room. The guests began to speak all at once, some defending me, others questioning my integrity. My parents finally arrived on stage, my father trying to calm Carmen while my mother hugged me protectively. Alejandro, still holding my hand, addressed the guests. "Please, everyone calm down. This must be a misunderstanding. Let's resolve this privately." But it was too late. Carmen was already dialing the police number on her phone, her hands visibly shaking. "Come immediately," I heard her say. "We have a thief here." The minutes that followed were a blur of emotions and confusion. Lucia came on stage and hugged me, whispering words of support in my ear. Alejandro was arguing heatedly with his mother, trying to reason with her. The guests divided into groups, some hurrying out of the room, others staying to watch the drama unfold. I felt like I was in a nightmare. How had I gone from celebrating my wedding anniversary to being accused of theft in a matter of minutes? My mind was spinning, trying to find an explanation, a way out of this surreal situation. That's when I heard the sirens. The police had arrived, and with them, the realization that this night, which should have been a celebration of love, had turned into something that could change my life forever. I saw two officers enter the room, their uniforms contrasting sharply with the elegant suits and evening dresses of the guests. Carmen immediately approached them, her tablet in hand, ready to present her evidence. Alejandro squeezed my hand. "Don't worry," he whispered to me. "Let's get this straight. Trust me." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust that everything would be resolved. But as I watched the officers approach, escorted by a triumphant Carmen, I couldn't help but feel like my world was about to fall apart. The anniversary party, which had begun with so much joy and hope, had now transformed into a scene of confusion, accusations, and potential disaster. And I, the supposed thief, was at the center of it all, desperately trying to maintain my composure as my life took an unexpected and terrifying turn. The sound of the sirens became increasingly louder, breaking the atmosphere of celebration that until recently reigned in the Moravia Hotel. The guests, still shocked by Carmen's accusation, moved aside to make way for two police officers who entered the room. Their blue uniforms contrasted strongly with the elegant suits and dresses of those present. I stood paralyzed on stage, feeling how Alejandro squeezed my hand as a sign of support. Carmen, for her part, rushed towards the officers, her face a mix of triumph and anxiety. "Here, officers!" Carmen exclaimed, waving her tablet in the air. "She's the thief." The police officers, a middle-aged man with grey hair and a serious-looking young woman, exchanged a look before approaching the stage. I could see the discomfort on their faces. Clearly, they weren't expecting to find themselves in the middle of an anniversary party. "Good evening," the senior officer said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm Agent Rodriguez and this is my partner, Agent Gomez. We received a call about an alleged robbery. Can someone explain to us what's going on here?" Before I could open my mouth to defend myself, Carmen stepped forward, practically shouting, "She stole my shoes. Very valuable shoes, a family heirloom." Agent Gomez took out a small notebook and began taking notes while her partner tried to calm Carmen down. Please calm down. We are going to resolve this in an orderly manner. Can you tell us your name and explain to us exactly what has happened?" Carmen took a deep breath, trying to control her agitation. "I am Carmen Bosques, the mother of this woman's husband." He gave me an accusatory look before continuing. "A few days ago, I noticed that my designer shoes, a gift from my late husband, had gone missing from my closet. At first I thought I had moved them, but then I checked the footage from the security camera I installed in my room and—" "Wait a minute," Agent Rodriguez interrupted. "Do you have a security camera in your room?" Carmen nodded impatiently. Yes. I installed it a few months ago after some jewelry mysteriously disappeared." He looked at me out of the corner of his eye again, making it clear who he blamed for those disappearances as well. I felt my blood boil. Not only was he accusing me of stealing his prized shoes, he was implying that I was responsible for other thefts. Alejandro, who until now had remained silent by my side, finally spoke. "Officers," he said, his voice strained but controlled, "this is a misunderstanding. My wife, Maria, would never do something like this. We are celebrating our second wedding anniversary and—" "Anniversary?" Agent Gomez interrupted, looking around the decorated room and the guests dressed to the nines. "What a time for an accusation like that," she murmured, more to herself than to us. Carmen, however, was not going to give up so easily. "I have proof," he insisted, waving his tablet. "The video clearly shows Maria entering my room and leaving with the shoes." The officers exchanged another look before Agent Rodriguez addressed me. Can you tell us your side of the story?" I felt all eyes on me. My parents, who had stayed on the sidelines until now, came forward to support me. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Officers," I began, my voice shaking slightly, "I assure you that I have not stolen anything. Not shoes, not jewelry, not anything. I don't know what my mother-in-law is talking about, but there must be some mistake." "A mistake?" Carmen screamed. "The video shows it all. See it for yourself." Agent Gomez extended her hand toward Carmen. "Can you show us that video, please?" As Carmen manipulated her tablet, I felt like the world was closing around me. How was it possible that there was a video showing me stealing something I hadn't touched? Confusion and fear overwhelmed me equally. The officers leaned over the screen, watching intently. I could see their expressions change subtly as the video played. When he finished, Agent Rodriguez turned to me with a serious expression. He said, "The video shows someone who looks very similar to you entering a room and leaving with an object in his hands. Can you explain this?" I felt like I was short of breath. I can't explain it because it wasn't me. I've never gone into Carmen's room without her permission, and I've certainly never taken anything from there. Alejandro intervened again. "Officers, I know my wife. She is not a thief. There must be another explanation for this." The tension in the room was palpable. The guests murmured among themselves, some defending me, others expressing their doubts. I saw Lucia, my best friend, making her way through the crowd with a determined expression on her face. "Wait," Lucia shouted when she reached us. "I think I can explain this. Maria was with me the day the robbery supposedly happened. We were at the mall, buying a gift for this party." Agent Gomez raised an eyebrow. "Can you prove it?" Lucia nodded enthusiastically. "Yes. I have photos on my phone and receipts from purchases. We even had coffee and I paid by card. I can show you the exact time." As Lucia searched for the evidence on her phone, I felt a ray of hope break through in the midst of this nightmare. Carmen, for her part, seemed increasingly agitated. "That doesn't prove anything," he insisted. "He could have stolen the shoes at another time." Agent Rodriguez raised a hand to calm her. "Mrs. Bosques, please. We are trying to clarify the facts." That's when another guest, a young man I recognized as Gabriel, a friend of Alejandro's who worked in technology, approached timidly. "Excuse me," he said, addressing the officers. "I don't want to pry, but I'm an expert in video analysis. If you'll allow me, I could take a closer look at that footage." The policemen looked at each other, considering the offer. Finally, Agent Gomez nodded. "Go ahead, but make it quick." Gabriel took Carmen's tablet and began manipulating the video, adjusting the brightness and contrast, zooming in on certain sections. We all watched in silence, holding our breath. After a few minutes that seemed eternal, Gabriel looked up, his face illuminated by a mixture of surprise and revelation. "Officers, I think I have found something important. The person in the video is not Maria." A murmur of astonishment ran through the room. Carmen visibly paled, while I felt an enormous weight lift from my shoulders. "What do you mean?" Agent Rodriguez asked, leaning down to see the screen better. Gabriel zoomed in on a section of the video. "Look here, on the person's arm. There is a mark, it looks like a tattoo. Maria doesn't have tattoos, right?" Alexander shook his head. "No, my wife doesn't have any tattoos." The revelation fell like a bomb in the room. Suddenly, all eyes turned to Carmen, whose face had gone from triumph to confusion and now horror. But, Carmen stammered, her voice losing strength. "If not Maria, then who?" It was at that moment that a young woman, who had been watching everything from a corner, stepped forward. I recognized her as Carla, Carmen's maid. I can explain it," Carla said, her voice barely audible above the murmur of the crowd. The officers turned to her, their expressions a mix of surprise and suspicion. "What do you mean, miss?" Agent Gomez asked. Carla, visibly shaking, lifted the sleeve of her blouse, revealing a small tattoo on her wrist. "It was me," she confessed, tears beginning to roll down her cheeks. "I took the shoes. But it wasn't to steal them, I just wanted to wear them one night, to a party. I was going to give them back, I swear." The silence that followed this confession was deafening. Carmen looked like she had been struck by lightning, her face a mask of disbelief and shame. Alejandro hugged me tightly, whispering words of apology in my ear. The officers, recovering from their surprise, approached Carla. "Miss, you will have to come with us to make a formal statement," Agent Rodriguez said, his tone softer now. As the police took Carla away, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. I was grateful that my name had been cleared, but I couldn't help but feel sorry for the young employee. Carmen, for her part, seemed to have completely deflated. He dropped into a nearby chair, his face buried in his hands. The anniversary party, which had begun with such joy and ended in total chaos, now seemed to dissolve into an atmosphere of awkwardness and regret. Alejandro took my hand and looked me in the eyes. "I'm so sorry, my love. I can't believe this happened. I promise we'll fix this." I nodded, too emotionally exhausted to speak. As the guests began to disperse, some coming forward to offer their apologies and support, I couldn't help but think about how everything had changed tonight. My relationship with my mother-in-law, already strained, now seemed irreparably damaged. And although my name had been cleared, I knew that the consequences of this night would reverberate for a long time. As we left the room, exhausted and shaken, I wondered how we could rebuild our family after this. The celebration of our love had become a test of our endurance, and only time would tell if we would be able to overcome it. The Moravia Hotel ballroom, which just a few hours ago was overflowing with joy and celebration, now seemed like an emotional battlefield. The few remaining guests moved in small groups, murmuring quietly and casting sidelong glances toward where Alejandro and I stood, still trying to process the events of the night. Carmen, my mother-in-law, sat in a remote chair, her face a mask of shame and confusion. The accusation he had leveled against me had collapsed spectacularly, and he now seemed to not know how to handle the consequences of his actions. Alejandro, with a protective arm around my shoulders, addressed the police officers who were still present. "What will happen now?" he asked, his voice a mix of tiredness and concern. Agent Rodriguez, the oldest officer, looked at us with sympathy. "Well, since the real person responsible has confessed, there are no charges against your wife, sir. However, we will need everyone involved to stop by the police station tomorrow to make formal statements." Agent Gomez added, "We would also like to take a closer look at that video. Although Miss Carla has confessed, it is important to make sure there are no more misunderstandings." I nodded, grateful for his professionalism. "Of course, we will be there. May I ask what will happen with Carla?" The officers exchanged a look before Agent Gomez responded. "That will depend on whether Ms. Carmen decides to press charges or not. For now, Ms. Carla will spend the night at the police station and tomorrow it will be decided how to proceed." I looked towards Carmen, wondering what was going through her mind at that moment. Would you press charges against Carla? Or would the shame of her mistake make her want to forget the whole thing? As the officers prepared to leave, Gabriel, Alejandro's friend who had discovered the truth in the video, approached us. "Hey," he said, turning to me with a sheepish smile, "I'm sorry about all this. I'm glad I was able to help clear things up." I smiled back, grateful. "Thank you, Gabriel. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't noticed that detail in the video." Gabriel nodded, then looked down at the tablet he still held in his hands. "You know, there's something else about this video that seems strange to me. Do you mind if I examine it a little more?" Alejandro and I exchanged a look before nodding. "Go ahead," said Alexander. "Anything that can shed more light on this situation would be welcome." Gabriel sat at a nearby table and began working on the tablet. Meanwhile, I saw my parents approaching. My mother, Elena, hugged me tightly. "Oh, honey," he murmured, "I'm so sorry. What a horrible night." My father, Antonio, seemed more angry than sad. "This is unacceptable," he growled, shooting Carmen a withering look. "Accuse our daughter of theft, and at her own anniversary party. We should." "Dad," I interrupted softly, "please. The worst is over. Now I just want this to be over." Alejandro nodded, supporting me. "Antonio, Elena, I promise you that we will fix this. I know that my mother, well, she made a terrible mistake, but she is my mother. We need to find a way to move forward as a family." While my parents and Alejandro quietly discussed how to handle the situation, my attention was diverted to Gabriel, who seemed increasingly absorbed in his analysis of the video. "Aha," he suddenly exclaimed, startling us all. "I think I have found something important." We gathered around him, curious and a little apprehensive. "What have you discovered?" I asked. Gabriel zoomed in on a section of the video and began to explain. "Look at this. The video clearly shows someone entering Carmen's room and leaving with the shoes, right? But there's something strange about the way the person moves." We leaned closer, trying to see what Gabriel was pointing at. He continued, Notice how the person looks directly at the camera just before entering the room. It's almost as if he knew exactly where the camera was. Alexander frowned. Are you suggesting this was planned? That Carla knew she was being filmed? Gabriel nodded slowly. It is possible. But there is more. Look at the quality of the video. It is surprisingly good for a domestic security camera, especially considering that Mrs. Carmen said she installed it a few months ago. This image quality is more typical of professional equipment or very recent. A chill toured my back. What are you saying exactly, Gabriel? He looked at us all before answering. I think this video could have been manipulated. I am not saying that it is completely false, but there are definitely elements that do not fit. The silence that followed this statement was heavy. Alejandro was the first to break it. But why? Why would someone manipulate such a video? Before Gabriel could answer, a drowned sob interrupted us. We turned to see Carmen, who had approached without us noticing and had heard all the conversation. His face was pale and his hands trembled. I didn't know, he blushed, tears running down his cheeks. The private detective assured me that the video was authentic. Private detective? I repeated, feeling how confusion gave way to indignation. Carmen, what are you talking about? Carmen collapsed in a nearby chair, looking suddenly much older and fragile. I hired a private detective a few months ago. I was convinced that someone was stealing me, small things at first, and then the jewels I mentioned. The detective installed the camera and provided me with this video a week ago. Alejandro passed a hand through the hair, clearly frustrated. Mom, why didn't you tell me any of this? Because, Carmen paused, struggling to find the words. Because I was embarrassed. Embarcado of thinking that my son's wife could be a thief. He wanted to be sure before saying something, but then I saw the video and I lost control. I looked at Carmen, feeling a mixture of penalty and anger. And did not you think to talk to me first? Ask me directly before accusing me in front of all our friends and family? Carmen lowered her head, unable to hold my gaze. I'm sorry, he whispered. Sorry so much. Gabriel, who had been listening in silence, intervened. Mrs. Carmen, could you tell me the name of that private detective? I think it would be important to investigate your participation in all this. Carmen nodded and scribbled a name and a number on a piece of paper. Gabriel took it and passed it to Agent Rodriguez, who had been watching the entire scene with professional interest. We will take care of investigating this individual, said the agent, keeping the role. If there have been some kind of fraud or evidence manipulation, we will discover it. While the officers prepared to leave, taking the tablet as evidence, I found myself looking around the room. The few guests who remained seemed not to know what to do, trapped between curiosity and discomfort. Lucia, my best friend, approached and hugged me. Are you okay? He asked softly. This has been, well, madness. I nodded, too exhausted to speak. Alejandro, who had been speaking quietly with his parents, joined us. I think it's time for us to finish the night, he said, his tired but firm voice. Tomorrow we will have to deal with all this, but for now, we need to rest. While we were preparing to leave, I couldn't help thinking about how a night that should have been celebrated, it had become so complicated and painful. The relationship with my mother-in-law, which was already tense, now seemed irremediably damaged. And although my name had been cleaned, I knew that tonight's consequences would resonate for a long time. Alejandro took me by the hand while we left the hotel. We will solve it, he said, although I could notice the doubt in his voice. Together, we will solve it. I nodded, wanting to believe him. But while we walked towards our car, with the sound of the police sirens fading in the distance, I could not help asking me what our future would be after tonight. Could we really overcome this? Could Carmen forgive for her distrust and actions? Only time would say it. For now, all he wanted was to get home, hurry at bed with Alejandro, and try to forget, even for a few hours, the nightmare in which our anniversary celebration had become. The next morning to our disastrous anniversary party arrived too soon. I woke up with the first rays of sun leaking through the curtains, feeling as if I had barely closed my eyes. Alejandro was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. Good morning, I murmured, my voice hoarse about the tiredness and emotions of the previous night. Alejandro turned to me, his eyes reflecting a mixture of concern and determination. Good morning, love. How do you feel? I sat up slowly, trying to order my thoughts. Honestly, I don't know. Everything seems so unreal, like a nightmare that I can't wake up. Alejandro approached and hugged me strongly. I know. But we are going to face this together, agree? We have to go to the police station this morning to give our statements. I nodded, remembering the instructions of the officers last night. While we were preparing to leave, I couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened. Carla's accusation, Carla's confession, and now the possibility that the video would have been manipulated. How had we reached this point? The trip to the police station was silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Upon arrival, we met Gabriel, who had been summoned to explain his findings about the video. I've been analyzing more thoroughly, he told us quietly while we expected to be called. I am increasingly convinced that someone manipulated that video intentionally. Before he could elaborate, the door opened and Agent Rodriguez made us go to a small interrogation room. To my surprise, Carmen was already there, sitting in a corner with a demacrated appearance. Good morning everyone, Agent Rodriguez began. We appreciate that you have come. We have some news that we want to share with you. Agent Gomez, who was standing with her partner, took the floor. We have been investigating the private detective that Mrs. Carmen hired. It turns out that it is not the first time that this individual is involved in cases of manipulated evidence. A collective gasp filled the room. Carmen paled visibly, sinking even more in her chair. What does that mean? Alejandro asked, his tense voice. Agent Rodriguez sighed. It means that we have reasons to believe that the video that Mrs. Maria allegedly showed the shoes was, in fact, manufactured. The revelation fell like a bomb in the small room. I felt a mixture of relief and anger. Relief because my innocence was finally confirmed, and anger because someone had deliberately tried to ruin my reputation and my marriage. But why? I asked, my voice just a whisper. Why would anyone do something like that? Gabriel, who had been listening carefully, intervened. I think I can shed some light on that. Last night, after everyone left, I kept investigating. It turns out that this private detective has connections with a network of scammers who specialize in creating family conflicts to benefit financially. The officers nodded, confirming Gabriel's theory. We have been after this network for months, Agent Gomez explained. It seems that its modus operandi is to identify wealthy families with pre-existing tensions and exploit them. Carmen, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke, her voice broken by emotion. I had no idea. When I hired the detective, I really believed that someone was stealing me. I never imagined that all this could be a scam. I turned to her, feeling a mixture of compassion and frustration. Carmen, why didn't you trust me? Why didn't you talk to me or Alejandro before reaching this point? Carmen looked down, unable to hold mine. I guess. I have always had my reservations about you, Maria. Not because you are a bad person, but because I felt I was losing my son. When things began to disappear, it was easy to believe the worst. Alejandro took my hand and his mother's. Mom, Maria is my wife. You are not losing me, you are winning a daughter. We need to trust each other. Agent Rodriguez clarified his throat. Well, since we now know that the video was manipulated, obviously there are no positions against Mrs. Maria. However, we still have Carla's issue. I had almost forgotten the young employee in the midst of all these revelations. What will happen to her? I asked. Well, technically, she confessed to having taken her shoes, Agent Gomez explained. Although we now know that the video was false, its confession is still a legal problem. Carmen straightened in her chair. I don't want to present charges against Carla. He has been the victim of this situation as much as any of us. I felt a flash of respect for my mother-in-law at that time. Despite everything that happened, I was choosing compassion. In that case, said Agent Rodriguez, we can fix so that Carla is released today. However, all of you must be available for future statements while we thoroughly investigate this network of scammers. We left the police station feeling exhausted but, in some way, relieved. The truth had come to light, and although the road to recovery would be long, at least now we knew what we faced. While we walked to the parking lot, Carmen suddenly stopped. "Maria, Alejandro, I'm very sorry. For everything. I know that a simple sorry is not enough, but I hope that over time they can forgive me." I looked at Alejandro, then Carmen. I took a deep breath before answering. "Carmen, I will not lie and say that this has not been incredibly painful. But I understand that we were all victims in this situation. He will take time, but I think we can overcome this, as a family." Alejandro hugged both of us, and for a moment, I felt that perhaps, only perhaps, we could reconstruct what had broken. The following days were an activity whirlwind. Police continued their investigation, discovering that the network of scammers had been operating throughout the city, taking advantage of vulnerable families. Gabriel became a key witness, helping the authorities with his experience in technology. Carla was released, and although she was initially too embarrassed to talk to us, we eventually agreed to gather. It turned out that she had also been manipulated by the false detective, who had convinced her to confess to protect someone else at home. As the weeks went by, the complete truth came to light. The detective and his accomplices were arrested, accused of multiple charges of fraud and extortion. We discovered that they had been observing our family for months, taking advantage of every small crack in our relationships to create conflict. Emotional recovery was a slow and sometimes painful process. Alejandro and I decided to find couple therapy, recognizing that we needed help to process everything that had happened. Carmen, on the other hand, began to see an individual therapist, working on his trust problems and in his tendency to cling too much to his son. Little by little, things began to improve. Our family dinners, which were previously tense and full of awkward silences, became more relaxed. Carmen made a conscious effort to meet me better, showing a genuine interest in my life and my passions. 6 months after that fateful anniversary night, we decided to try something bold, a renewal of votes. It would not be a great celebration like the previous one, but something intimate and significant. In a small ceremony in the garden of my parents' house, Alejandro and I reaffirm our love and commitment. This time, when Carmen came to hug us after the ceremony, her tears were of genuine joy. "Thank you," he whispered in my ear, "for not giving up with our family." While watching our loved ones gathered, chatting and laughing under the warm afternoon sun, I realized that, despite all the pain and confusion, we had left stronger on the other side. Trust, we discover, is something fragile and beautiful. It can break in an instant, but with patience, understanding and a true desire to heal, it can also be rebuilt, stronger than ever. That night, while Alejandro and I prepared to sleep, I reflected on the trip we had made. "Do you know?" I said, curling me with him, "I think I finally understand what it really means in good times and in the bad." Alejandro kissed me gently. And here we are, stronger than ever. I closed my eyes, feeling deep gratitude. We had faced a storm that threatened to destroy everything, but instead of sinking, we had learned to navigate together. And now, with the horizon clear before us, I was excited to see what the future would hold. The months that followed the night of our anniversary and the subsequent investigation were a period of introspection and healing for our whole family. Every day he brought new challenges, but also small victories that gave us hope that, eventually, we could overcome this crisis. One Sunday morning, approximately 3 months after the incident, Alejandro and I were having breakfast on the terrace of our apartment in Madrid. The morning sun bathed the city, giving a golden shine to the roofs of the neighboring houses. While distracting my coffee with milk distracted, Alejandro broke the comfortable silence that had settled between us. "Do you know? I was thinking of inviting my mother to have dinner tonight," he said, with a cautious tone that indicated that I was not sure how I would react to the idea. I looked up from my cup, finding my expectant gaze. There was a time, not long ago, in that the mere mention of Carmen would have been enough to get defensive. But things had changed. We had all changed. "I think it's a good idea," I replied after a moment of reflection. "We haven't seen her out of family therapy sessions." Alejandro smiled, visibly relieved. "Thank you, love. I know it hasn't been easy for you." I extended my hand on the table to take yours. It has not been easy for any of us. But we are progressing, right? That night, while we prepared dinner, I couldn't help feeling a mixture of nervousness and hope. Carmen arrived on time, as always, with a bouquet of flowers and a bottle of red wine. "Thank you for inviting me," he said when he entered, his soft voice and loaded with an emotion that I could not completely identify. Repentance. Hope. Maybe a mixture of both. Dinner spent surprisingly well. We talk about light issues at the beginning, time, the latest news of the city, the projects in which Alejandro and I were working. Little by little, the conversation became more personal. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened," Carmen said suddenly, leaving her glass of wine on the table. "And I have realized how much damage I have caused over the years with my distrust and my fears." Alejandro and I exchanged a look. This was a crucial moment, we knew. Carmen continued, her voice trembling slightly. "Maria, I know that a simple sorry is not enough to erase all the pain that I have caused you. But I want you to know that I am working hard on myself, in my insecurities. I want to be better, not only for Alejandro or by you, but for myself too." I felt a knot in my throat. In spite of everything we had happened, seeing Carmen so vulnerable moved me deeply. "Carmen," I started, carefully choosing my words, "I appreciate that you are making this effort. I know it has not been easy for you either. And although it is true that a sorry does not erase the past, it is a good point of departure to build a better future." Alejandro, who had been listening in silence, took the hand of his mother and mine. "I am very proud of both," he said, with bright eyes of emotion. "We have gone through a lot, but here we are, trying. That is what matters." The rest of the evening passed in an atmosphere of warm courtship. When Carmen left, we all hugged each other, a gesture that would have been unthinkable a few months ago. The following days brought new challenges and opportunities to heal. One afternoon, while walking through the Retiro Park, I met Carla, Carmen's former employee. At first, we both were paralyzed, without knowing how to react. But then, almost without thinking, I invited her to have coffee. Sitting in a small cafeteria overlooking the pond, Carla told me her version of the story. How the false detective had manipulated her, threatening to reveal some mistakes of her past if she did not cooperate. How he had felt trapped and desperate. "I never wanted to hurt them," he said, with tears in my eyes. "I was so scared and confused. When I saw what was happening at the party, I knew I had to tell the truth, regardless of the consequences." I took my hand above the table. "Carla, we were all victims in this situation. The important thing is that in the end, the truth came to light." We said goodbye with a hug, promising to keep us in touch. While walking back home, I reflected on how this experience had changed us all. We had been put to the proof of the worst possible way, but somehow, we were going on. The weeks became months. Alejandro and I continue with our couple therapy, discovering new ways of communicating and supporting each other. Carmen continued working on her problems, and little by little, we began to build a healthier relationship. There were difficult times, of course. Days in which the old grudges threatened to resurface, in which distrust was peaked like a shadow in the corners of our mind. But every time we faced an obstacle, we remembered how far we had arrived and found the strength to overcome it. A year after that fateful anniversary night, we decided to do something symbolic. We organized a small dinner at home, inviting our closest friends and family. It was not a great celebration like the previous year, but something intimate and significant. When everyone was gathered in our living room, Alejandro and I stood up. "We want to thank everyone for being here," I started. "This last year has been..." Well, saying that it has been difficult would be to fall short. There were some comprehensive laughs among the guests. Alejandro continued, "But it has also been a year of growth, learning and rediscovering ourselves as a family. And we wanted to share this moment with the people who have supported us throughout this trip." Carmen, who was sitting next to my parents, an image that would have been unthinkable a year ago, stood up. "If they allow me," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I would like to say something." We all keep silent, expectant. Carmen breathed deep before continuing. "A year ago, I made a terrible mistake. I let my fears and insecurities cloud my judgment, and almost destroy this beautiful family in the process. But thanks to the strength and love of my son and my daughter-in-law, and to all of you, we are here today, more united than ever.